right, let's get into this real quick. The Conductors by Nicole Glover. So at 184 pages, I'm going to throw this fireball out here. At 184 pages, this book almost was a DNF experience. However, there's one primary thing that really resurrected or was the saving grace to my reading experience that kept me reading so much so that I'm currently 150 pages into the second book, The Undertakers. Like, I follow right behind this one with this. So the Conductors, let's talk about what it was that drew me down and built me back up with excitement. So the synopsis or the characters. So the Conductors follows the story of a woman named Henrietta or Hetty and her husband Benjamin. At one point in life, they were actually conductors on the Underground Railroad. And while the book does launch the reader back into the experience at key pivotal moments within the story to reflect that experience with the current timeline, the primary timeline is post-Civil War, Reconstruction era, North in Philadelphia. Now, what's interesting about this duo is that they spent a lot of their time, being conductors on the Underground Railroad, where everything, every outlet, every observation, every mission was their life on the line. And there's that building of skill sets to maneuver and sneak, and you know what I'm saying, like, I don't have to dress it up too far, but they use that skill set to apply to their profession in the current timeline, where they are a special interest investigative duo. So people come to them for like incidents where magical malaise has gone wild, for interesting cases where someone goes missing under some unique and peculiar circumstances, and murders, solving crimes is also there within their bag. So that's kind of the overall story here. Is Henrietta and Benjamin, they solve these interesting crimes, these special interest crimes. And what is the major backbone crime that takes place in the Conductors is it has to do with a man that they are both familiar with, who is a friend of theirs, who is found murdered within an alley. The signs of his death attribute to both physical trauma as well as metaphysical trauma in regards to magic. And one of the most implied motives behind his death has to do with his history as a gambler, taking risks with money and gambling and getting involved with a number of different nefarious criminals, if you will, that are within the gambling rings that he frequents within. So that's the core crime within the book. So what's interesting about the Conductors is that the author blends three elements, and independently I struggle with them, and collectively I struggle with them as they blend it together. So obviously historical fiction is there. As I said, it takes place in an era post the Civil War, in the Reconstruction years. So that's obvious. Historical element is there. A little altered by the fact that fantasy is another genre that's blended within this book, as they are individuals, Hetty and Benjamin, who can wield magic. Magic is a source within this alternate retelling. Magic is everything. And then there's, of course, the mystery part, as I spoke about the death of their friend and the fact that they are a private investigator duo. But yes, independently I struggle with all these areas, and that of course subsequently meant that collectively I almost DNF'd this book, but I'll tell you why I did not. So I want to address each of these key points on their own. So we'll start with the historical part. So this book was another example of what I like to kind of express or deem as where an author romanticizes about a particular era without the rhapsodizing about it. Some people are like, well, what are you talking about? So, of course, when you romanticize something, a particular era, you're looking at primarily the good portions, the glowing portions, the culturally relevant portions. And a lot of times when authors do this, they sort of sanitize the grittier parts. So, come on, we're looking at Philadelphia in the North, post-Civil War, in the Reconstruction era. So, there's a lot of grittiness that could be drawn from there, especially with racial tensions. The author did kind of touch on that, but like I said, there's that little glimmer of sanitization that went into this book where I wanted more. I hungered for much more of that commentary, those thought processes that these characters could relate to the reader in regards to their experience as black characters in this setting. I wanted more of that. If you're going to take me there, then I really would like to go there. So just a touch of a romantic view was drawn or dressed around these characters, in their setting. There was a little bit of mention of like Nat Turner, which, the rebellious crusade of Nat Turner, the slave. Then of course you pull in that the Underground Railroad, that grittiness in there, but there just wasn't enough, given that this is a historical retelling or historical alternate world. There just wasn't enough of that grittiness that I wanted, that I hungered for, and was hoping that the author would express through the character's experience. So when I say romanticizing without the rhapsodizing, if you're not going to give me that, or if you're going to kind of sanitize this era, then at least rhapsodize about the things that you liked. And when I say rhapsodize, I mean give me some of the context, the textures to the different materials that went on within this world that you do like. Give me some of the specifics about the garments. I love that kind of detail. Give me the specifics about just some of the much more just nuanced cultural relevant things that were going on within this time. Just something to further illustrate and layer and give texture and dressing to this particular time period in which you want to write about. But the author didn't do that part either. She left a lot of there was a lot of the reader having to do sort of that imaginative work, with so little detail to help, really illustrate and bring color and vibrancy to each scene. So that was annoying. So like when you say, an example, when an author describes like a character's stove, obviously it's not a stove like in modern times like we have now. So, and while intuitively the reader know that it's not, and we can see the vision of it, when I say rhapsodize, I mean, can't you just give us some more details about why, you know what I'm saying? Like just put a little bit more detail into their area. But of course you can't do it all the way across the board. But just, if you're not going to give it, you're going to sanitize it just a bit, at least give us some of the glowing parts that you really like. That's what I mean when I say they rhapsodize when I say they romanticize without the rhapsodizing of the setting and the era that they want to go into. Hope that makes sense. So yeah, I wanted a little bit more of the grittiness of this time period. I wanted a little bit more of the commentary. And if that wasn't present, then I would have liked a lot more details about, the much more, I guess you could say, the easier digestible material or conversations that could have been had in regards to the period that these characters were in. So that was lackluster. Then we're looking at the fantasy. Now, the first 50 pages of the book, I was kind of just gripped into the fact that there was magic involved. There's two branches of magic. There's sorcery, and then there's celestial magic. The white characters tend to use sorcery. So they use wands. The wands are the conduit to their spells. And then the black characters, they are known for using celestial magic, and that's where they use sigils. They draw sigils in the air, or they stitch it into cloths and that sort of thing, and then they use that sigil to be the conduit to their spell casting. In any fantasy book, if you're going to have magic, you have to have a well-built magic system. In this case, it was on shaky ground. The thing about a magic system in a fantasy book is it is great for putting together and making the designs of what are the limitations for the magic within their world, a fantasy world, and what are the specific characteristics of the magic, and then what most importantly are the consequences when you go beyond the boundaries of how you use magic, whether it's beyond the limit, or if you sort of like in some cases you don't use it enough till the point where you just forget it. The magic system in this world was just it read too limitless to me. It didn't have that foundation that I was hoping to receive, where not everything, not every problem, not every situation could be handled with a simple spell. That's kind of annoying, because it's like if you're solving a crime, it's almost like, what's the point when you can just cast a spell and get the information that you need to solve the case? So we're looking at this big old thick book here going through this crime, and it's like at some points I'm like, well, can't you just cast, why are there obstacles if there is no core like Bible to how magic is ran and in this world? And so that was frustrating to me, because it's like anytime that happens where there isn't a good solid definition of how the magic system works in a fantasy world, the whole time I'm questioning, like, why didn't she just do this? You can float items behind you, you can float tea kettles to you, so you can do this and highlight footprints and tracks when you're hunting somebody. The characters were conductors on the Underground Railroad. That means they had to have a plethora of magical resources and talents and traits that they could employ to have survived that long. You know what I'm saying? But without that understanding what are the limits, consequences, it just doesn't land well to me. It kind of remind me like when you read a mystery book, and maybe this is as close as I can kind of tie it together. When you're reading a mystery book, you know how a protagonist uses a gun. The author takes a moment to describe how the gun is, and once the gun is fired, there's that ballistic situation. So when someone who is an expert at guns read that material and maybe write the author and say, hey, that's not how this specific gun actually works, calling them out, that's kind of how it feels with a magic system. I'm always questioning why they won't do certain things, just like somebody who is a gun expert will be like, well, this is not what made this author decide to do it this way, and etc., etc. The trick is that with a gun, what the author can do is say it was like modified or something. But with a magic system, you need just that layer to let the reader know this is what happens when you go beyond the limits. This is what happens when you go below the limits, and these are the consequences. I just wish that this book gave that. Otherwise, it was limitless. Okay, so the last part is the mystery part. Now, the mystery part, this book was just like the author was blowing any which way to me. The thing that really I struggled with probably the most is that there was too many characters. There was a cast of characters, and I had a hard time distinguishing them and their roles and their titles. For whatever reason, I had to keep going back in my head and saying, okay, like the character of Darlene, she is the one who is known as an artist. She is the one that had adopted a baby. And then I had to say, well, when her husband comes on scene, her husband is it George? George is the one that owns the schoolhouse. It was so many different characters that it was kind of hard to keep up with. They just didn't seem to come alive fully on stage for me at all in this book. And so I was constantly have to revisit in my head, who is this character? Where did they come from? When did they first, what I'm saying? Like I had to keep doing that extra legwork in turn with trying to follow a mystery about a murdered man that was blowing any and each everywhere in every direction. It was not concise to me. 1 minute Benji would say, I know, we can go find a clue at the boxing ring. He's a gambler, maybe they can go find something there. But then in that situation, you leave that scene at the boxing ring and you're just not quite sure what was it that they were getting out of that, because then next thing you know, it blows over in this direction. Let's go to this excursion, and then there's this big scene where the ground, where somebody laid a spell and the ground opened up on them, and it's just like, well, what were we supposed to get out of here? So I couldn't quite follow the mystery portion, and it's not a matter of me trying to beat the author at his or her game, because in a lot of cases, I like to just let go of that. In some cases, I like to really engage with that. But it's just a simple matter of being able to track the progress in itself that was a struggle to me, because I just felt like the author was going any and everywhere. It's another example of, let's romanticize about what was going on in this period, because I just want to throw this scene in here where they learned how to use bicycles at this time. But you're like, well, how is all this relating? It just needed a little more extra emphasis on what exactly was taking place, why the characters were there, what were their motives, and who were the characters in that particular scene, and why we the reader should be or should not be watching them. So I had a hard time keeping up with that. It was just any which way the wind blew to me. So, which is okay, but at the same time, it's just like, it's kind of frustrating to me, because you start getting discouraged when you can't follow reason and logic, and it's just going anywhere. But whatever, I kind of managed to make it through. And the reason that I did manage to make it through this book, the number one reason why I kept reading and finished the book, and I'm now in the second book, is because I absolutely love the author's dialogue. Specifically, I love the dialogue and the character of Hetty. Now, Hetty got a smart ass mouth, sort of like me sometimes, but I just like her tenacity. I really loved how the author wrote Hetty. I loved how the author wrote her dialogue, and how forceful she was, and how, like I said, her tenacity to solve crimes, how she was just kind of a little prickly, a little brittle around the edges when it came to her interactions and her relationships with the other characters. But they were sort of with the characters who knew so much about her history as a conductor, and they were just completely warm to her for the most part. And she was such a no nonsense character that underneath all of that, she was most certainly warm to them as well. So I love the character of Hetty. She was the one that just kept me reading. I could see why some people may not like her as a character, but me personally, I really did enjoy her, and I really did enjoy her dialogue, to the point where sometimes I was just bursting out laughing, because I just loved her interactions with other characters, especially her husband Benji. They would have this slight banter with one another, and Hetty always was, she was a no-nonsense character, but I love that part of her. So that is what kept me reading, to the point where I am 150 pages in the second book here, and I'm glad that I kept reading, because this is a vast improvement on just about all those different genres, or the independent problems that I have with the other book. Like, the history is a lot better told here. I'm feeling a lot more warm to the setting, and the setting's feeling a lot more alive than the first book. The characters they very much established themselves. The author is doing a great job of making sure that me as a reader, understand them better. Of course, that had a lot to do with me getting to know them, or being introduced to them in this book, so it made sense to follow straight through, and I got a better grasp of the characters. With the mystery, I'm following the story really well. She's pacing it really slowly, but I'm not aggravated by it. It's much better to me than the pace of this one, which was slow but watery at the same time, meaning I never left each scene knowing exactly what was the purpose of the scenes. But this one is much better. So I'm glad that I kept going, and I'm hoping that there's a third book that's going to be coming out, because these books haven't came out since 2021, and I need some more. It's 2 years later. Where's the third book at? You know what I'm saying? So that is my experience reading The Conductors, and I'm currently, the day after, I went straight to Barnes & Noble. I was not ordering nothing online. I went straight to Barnes & Noble and bought The Undertakers, and right now I can't wait to read that book now. So, had some troubles with the Conductors, almost DNF'd it, but the character of Hetty She made me keep reading. And another thing I can say about the Conductors is that while there was some struggles within some scenes, there was a lot of glowing moments when Hetty and Benjamin were doing like active things that the author just kept. Let's just say that when she had some good stuff, she didn't follow it through well enough to me. Like, we'll just keep it at that. That's too vague. But this video is long enough, so that's it. I'm out of here. Bye, y'all.